Hi, I'm Jeff Van West, the director of Real World VFR. I also held down the instructor's seat at the sim and in the Cessna, while Keith Smith flew the scenarios in front of the cameras. Real World VFR isn't about doing everything perfectly. It reveals how we prepared, how the flights actually played out in the real world, and what we did or didn't do as that happened. In the end, everyone can learn something. The biggest imperfect event, however, happened on a deadhead leg. Luckily, the cameras were running and caught how we ended up almost catastrophically low on an unplanned approach to Montpelier, Vermont just after sunset. The fact that it happened is both sobering and embarrassing. The fact that we caught it on camera compels us to share it anyway. So here's the story of the accident that didn't happen when two experienced pilots flew right into a classic black hole trap. Due to schedule and weather, we had to reposition an aircraft late in the afternoon to fly the planned night departure from Montpelier out of sequence with the rest of the flights. Now, we briefed our flight into Montpelier in the studio.
And of course, the town itself is just east.
Nestled in the hills, it should be pretty easy to find, this one.
Very good. I see a short runway and a long runway, so let's have a look at the airport itself.
We'd also briefed and practiced the departure out of Montpelier in the black of night and surrounded by terrain.
So, looking at that for Montpelier, off of runway 5, we're going to climb on essentially runway heading, the 048 heading, to 2,100. That's nearly 1,000 feet AGL.
We'd even talked about the dangers of night approaches into other airports, such as Block Island, and the importance of visual approach indicators.
Block Island has runway 10 and 28. We have PAPIs on both runways. That's spectacular news. I'm actually more excited about the flight now than I was about 5 seconds ago.
If you have a visual approach slope indicator of some kind, then absolutely use it.
So in our mind, we were well briefed, despite the fact that we had never specifically briefed a night approach into Montpelier. But then we weren't really thinking night approach when we launched because it was still daylight. Given that Keith would do all the flying, he offered this leg to me.
You want to do any flying? You want to fly the leg? Yeah, it sounds good.
I accepted, but I should have made a point that we were both tired from what had already been a long day. We both lacked in night proficiency, as this was the middle of summer, and I should have clarified our cockpit roles when we changed who was on the controls. Daylight dwindled as we flew, but we still weren't thinking night because the light above the horizon was bright. The airport is in a valley, however, and the post-frontal winds were just rocking the airplane, so I was a bit preoccupied. Keith later told me that he was thinking how glad he was not to have the responsibility for the upcoming gusty landing. We were now set up for a classic black hole approach, where the lack of references makes the airport appear closer than it actually is, and pilots tend to fly too low. Ironically, we even talk about the proximity of terrain and the hill we know is between us and the airport.
They're not clearing this terrain by much. Not complaining though. Must have at least 1,000 feet based on between here and there.
Oh, what it looks like. We got a little ridge you got to cross, but...
Here's what happens next. I end up excessively low on a long, flat approach. I have a nagging feeling something is wrong and ask Keith about a VASI.
No VASI on this side, huh?
Apparently not.
This makes him look out his window, where a ground light passes by, and call up synthetic vision on the iPad, just as I add power and level off.
Gusty, too. Lower than I want to be. That's better.
He still doesn't mention our altitude until I start to ease down again, still a bit flat, just as we cross that hill and it passes outside his window.
Wow. Wow. There are some pretty good trees right below us.
Yep. So I was looking for a VASI.
If you My speeds run out, let me know.
Oh, that's all right. There's not blowing right down the runway. That was kind of crappy.
Nice job. That worked out. My only concern was the altitude.
on final.
I should have said something sooner.
Yeah.
It was only when I looked out the window and we were clearing terrain by maybe 200 or 300 feet
Yeah.
that I just hadn't seen in front of us. It was just a total guess. Not having the VASI sucked.
Yeah.
But it did feel like we were low eventually.
Yeah, and that's why I started leveling off. And I'm like, God, that just feels wrong.
Exactly.
So,
I got to the synthetic vision too late too. As I turned it on, we were just passing the terrain.
well, there's a good example of a black hole without a VASI.
Now, were we really only 200 to 300 feet from that hill? We were back there the next day, so we used the data from the iPad to refly the exact same path and altitudes in daylight. It's hard to tell with the fisheye effect of the camera, but we pass 100 to 200 feet above those trees. We're below the hill on the left. Any lower the night before, and we would have seen the runway vanish behind the hill between us and the airport. Montpelier has no VASI for this runway, probably because of this hill on final. Had we briefed a night approach, we should have caught the lack of a VASI, which would have tipped us off. Even if we had flown an instrument approach into Montpelier, we could have fallen victim to the illusion in that final descent from MDA to the runway. You know, it's easy to look at that video after the fact and say, I'd never get that low. Or, I always fly an instrument approach into an unfamiliar airport after sunset. But the truth is, I know half a dozen names of better aviators than I'll ever be, who got tripped up by some combination of events that ended badly. I'll never know exactly what happened because there were no cameras and they're not around to tell me the tale. But in this case, the cameras were running and it ended well. So we get to share one more lesson learned in Real World VFR.